Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I'm going to talk about bulking and cutting and recomping. And I've been seeing things around, hey, bulking and cutting is dead. You shouldn't do it anymore. And I just think I think there's two things, and I'll talk about it, but I think that's the wrong statement. But I also don't think people need these super aggressive bulks and cuts either. So we'll dive into that. But first, before I go into that, if you are interested in learning more about a body recomp, what it is, 2 different types, 10 things you need for it, then my free body recomp checklist is for you. So make sure you go and check that out. Second, if you are looking to take things to the next level with your training, you're interested in what I go over today or improving your performance, just feeling better, whatever it is, I have my one-on-one coaching. So if you're interested in that, again, always looking to add more motivated people to my roster. I love working with people like that. If that's you and you're interested in learning more, you can either follow me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_, reach out, we can chat, or check out my website or fill out a link to set up a call there. All that's in the show notes. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. So I may go on some tangents here with this, and I have a general outline of what I want to go with, but I'm also just going to kind of let this flow where I do. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to this whole recomp talk and bulking and cutting, I just think sometimes we tend to maybe talk past each other here, and there's a lot of semantics that are involved with it. What exactly does somebody mean by that? This can be a challenging topic to discuss, and people can maybe start to talk over each other here around this, right? And I think when we talk recomp, I think, again, the sort of what you'll see in the research is this, hey, weight stays around the same and you're simultaneously losing fat and building muscle, right? I agree. I think that is part of a recomp. But to me, recomp is also like you're over time adding muscle and losing body fat. And so I think there's different ways that we can go about that. If you take that approach of simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain there, which to me is an umbrella, like that is one part of it. Again, probably the most common recomp scenario that people will talk about, but there are different types of scenarios, right? Like you can also lose body fat while maintaining muscle. You are recomping there, right? You have less fat on your body, and so your body composition is different. You could be adding some muscle without adding any fat, and so your body fat percentage will go down in that situation. You'll look better at that. Or again, over time, you do a combination of both when you slide across the energy balance scale. But there also is the ability to simultaneously lose body fat and build muscle. And while I'm at this, if you really want another deep dive into body recomp, check out episode 730 here, where I going to continue to dive into some similar things, but that's a really good overview of body recomposition there. Again, I think it's super important. And then, so again, a lot of people think there's only 2 options. Hey, the old school kind of bulk hard, cut hard, and this is where you're going to see those drastic weight changes over periods of time. And then there's a new school where it's, hey, bulking and cutting is dead. You just need to recomp, and that's all you need to do. But to me, the reality really is that you're still going to need to move between some periods focused a bit more on the fat loss side of the energy balance spectrum, and then periods focus more on fueling performance in the muscle growth side. There is going to be this period of time where you really don't necessarily need to do that. And we have a little bit more flexibility in terms of what we can do, but we still need to make sure that we go through that. Another good episode to look at would be my most previous one that I did on can you lose fat at maintenance? So I really dive into that as well too. So really been hitting hard on a lot of these concepts. Definitely check out that episode that I put out on Monday. So it's the most previous one that I did there. But I saw a post come out by someone that I really respect in the fitness industry, and he has a great content. And basically it was bulking and cutting is not superior to recomping, and saying, hey, you don't have to bulk and cut. And basically like it's that is dead, right? And so while I agree with what he says here, hey, many experts will tell you can only see results while remaining the same body weight if you just started lifting, you're returning from a long layoff, or you just start using PEDs. And again, I think this is important too. He says, while remaining the same body weight. So I think it is important what people talk about specifically within this, right? And in this one is remaining the same body weight there. And in every other circumstance, these quote unquote experts will tell you that you need to bulk and cut in order to see results. But there are indeed other scenarios that will lead to rapid gains. Here are the 15 scenarios. And he shows a picture of his client that's 6 years difference, 135 in all pics. Now, again, she looks great transformation. Definitely can tell that she improved her body composition. Biggest thing here is when I see this pic, like different lighting. So that's tough to see. And also, was she 135 the entire time? I would be really curious to see that. Maybe she was, but I would be curious. And then in 6 years difference, which again, this stuff takes time, right? Like you definitely don't, again, the body comp change is going to take time. In this scenario, could she have gotten there a little bit quicker in 6 versus 6 years if maybe she does what I'm to talk about today? And again, by all means, I'm a huge recomp fan, right? So I'm not going to say you need to bulk and cut, and I'm not going to say you can't recomp. And again, we'll go into some of those intricacies today, but 6 years difference could have been cut down a little bit. Potentially. Does it matter? It just depends, right? Do you want to get to somewhere quicker, or does having it be a little bit longer, is that okay? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but I would be curious if her weight actually stayed 135 throughout, because I do agree that in a 6 year time frame, if maybe she had a period of time where she was a little bit lower, she was a little bit higher, but then she ended up at 135. If that's the case, I 100% agree. Again, we don't need these massive weight loss and weight increases to change our body composition. Just keep that in mind here when I'm looking at this. So some of the things you mentioned was when you first start lifting weights. Yes, again, that's a great time to quote unquote recomp. But again, are we just saying maintaining weight, or what do we mean by that? Dramatically improve upon training. Again, yes, 100%, right? So now we're starting to get into, we're improving our inputs versus not really worrying about calories, which 100% I agree with this, right? If you start improving your training, you're going to see some good progress without necessarily having to overly be worried about dropping weight or increasing weight. Dramatically improve upon nutrition. Typically, we're looking at a bit more protein, but probably in general. So again, yes, another sort of input that is super important. Returning from a long layoff makes sense. You typically see people that once they get back into training, they are going to see recomp. They're going to have your quote unquote, your typical recomp that people think. You're just going to see your body improve, probably just from you're adding tissue very quickly, because again, that was there before. Finally, being able to train hard due to an injury fully healing up. Totally agree, right? Like that comes back to improved weight training. First time using anabolic steroids, again, makes sense, right? Like you're just in a different physiological state there. There's more, you just have higher muscle growth potential in that situation. Jumping back on anabolic steroids after a long layoff from them, again, makes sense, right? If you listen to my episode 730, I talk about muscle growth potential, and that all falls within that. He talks about from a low to optimal protein intake. Again, agree, right? Improving your inputs, switching from a low to optimal sleep schedule. Again, improving our inputs, switching from a high to optimal amount of life stress. Again, improving inputs, dramatically increasing motivation to train hard, wedding, photo shoot competition. So yeah, probably comes back to you're pushing your training hard and you're just more dialed in on things. Removing barriers such as drug use, disordered eating, or excessive cardio. So again, you're just improving your inputs in that situation. First time specializing on a body part, specialization plan. First time focusing on performance instead of physique. So again, more of a, hey, your input, your drive, instead of overly worrying about physique, you're worrying about what your training is doing, which again is going to improve your training overall. You're probably feeling better for that training. Dramatically increase the amount of anabolic steroids. First time training in optimal training environments. Again, you better equipment, more motivation in your training. So again, ultimately comes down to better training. So I agree with all those things there, right? But with all those being said, I do think that it, again, in the short term is going to definitely drive progress for all those things. But again, I still think that this, and I'm going to make this point here in a minute, and where I do agree with this post, and this person is very well respected in the fitness industry, and I respect him. I think he's very good. And we probably agree on more things than not here. But I just want to make sure that people don't think that now they don't have to ever change energy balance. They can stay in the same all the time, when again, that's not always going to be the case here. So let's dive into my point. So like I was saying, there's the two options. People think old school, hey, you need to bulk hard, you need to cut hard. So you have these drastic weight changes. We know that you don't need to do that. Now there's new school where you just recomp forever. And I do think that's sometimes we're missing the overall big picture, right? You still need to move through different energy balances, right? Maybe at periods of time we're focused a bit more on the fat loss side, and then more periods we're focused a bit more on the fueling performance and muscle growth side of things. Again, over time there. And like I said, in that client picture that he showed, yeah, there could be a ton of situations where you could show a 6-year difference in somebody's picture. Hey, they were 135 here and they finished at 135. But again, what were things in between? Did they always stay at 135? That I would find that hard to believe in that situation, right? But again, maybe they did. Now, this is where the individual side of things from the person is super important too. If a guy is 135 and he wants to be super jacked, unless he's 5'2" or 5'1", it's like super short essentially. You're gonna have to put on some weight, right? Again, would that mean that's not a recomp because now he's 155? So I think sometimes we need to look into that. But I think this really applies for people that are in those more moderate kind of weight ranges, right? And it's going to be dependent on height as well too. But if you're outside of those extremes, you're going to have to obviously change your weight a little bit. And still, even if you're in those moderate ranges, I think you still are going to need to see your weight slightly fluctuate, just not as big as we think there, right? So this is where I get into my point. So one, you don't need a big surplus to build muscle. We know that, right? Most people can grow muscle just fine around maintenance calories, and depending on inputs in their current body comp, you can build muscle in a deficit. This is where I come back to inputs. So all the things he mentioned, right? Those are all what I consider inputs there. If you improve those, you're definitely going to put yourself in a good position to build muscle, and you don't need to worry about a big surplus. And the biggest thing for a lot of people is they don't have all those dialed in at one time. And so continuing to improve those things will be able to improve your ability to build muscle without feeling like you need a massive surplus there. And again, if you are maybe a little bit higher on the body fat scale from a body fat percentage standpoint, you don't need to gain, or you can build muscle in a deficit, especially if those inputs are in check, right? So you don't need to gain a bunch of weight, especially the higher your body fat percentage is here. But a small surplus can be helpful over time, especially as you get more advanced or you want to maximize muscle growth. But this should not be the case if you are at moderate body fat levels. Then I don't think you need to do that. But if somebody does get to the point where they get a bit leaner and they want to continue to add more muscle, I don't think you're going to be able to build the type of muscle you want by potentially being in a small deficit or being at maintenance, right? So I think it really comes down to, do you want to maximize muscle growth, which people say they do, but that is going to work like I think most people do want to be close to that, because I think muscle is tough to come by, but not necessarily everybody wants to have as much muscle as possible there. So again, I do think there are some times in certain situations where a small surplus is important, and that's going to be someone that's on the leaner side and they want to really maximize muscle growth. But if you fall outside of those two things, you don't need to. So if you just fall out of, hey, I don't want to maximize muscle growth, then you probably don't ever really need to purposely push weight up. And then if you're not on the leaner side of things, then you also don't need to really push your weight up or purposely push your weight up to build muscle. Just understand though that as you build more muscle and you get leaner, building muscle in a deficit, your ability does go down over time with that. So again, that already maps out you really don't need to push weight super high. I do think you still need some periods of time where you fuel yourself enough to put yourself in a better position to build muscle. There's going to be some people from a genetic standpoint that maybe can get away with that. Maybe their inputs are just really good, but I still think no matter what, like you're not going to be able to see that simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain over time. You're going to have to be at least maintenance calories. And again, for some people, they're going to have to push their body weight up a little bit, right? 2, you don't need aggressive weight loss to lose fat. So most people don't need aggressive weight loss to lose fat / change their body comp. But you can improve your body composition while keeping scale weight relatively stable and seeing a little bit slower weight loss. And that's probably going to increase your ability to build muscle, the smaller the deficit is there. But again, you don't need this, hey, I need to lose 1 pound a week or whatever to lose fat. You can still do that, keeping body weight around the same, maybe not necessarily seeing that drastic weight cut there. But a larger deficit will drive faster fat loss. It just comes with a little bit more trade-offs, right? Less to no muscle gain at that point, the larger the deficit gets, more diet fatigue over time, less flexibility. It's going to be harder to stick with it. You need to spend less time here, but you'll see quicker fat loss again, our inputs need to be in check, right? And if I am going to be more aggressive with a fat loss or like a surplus, it's definitely going to be fat loss, because if we go aggressive with a surplus, you're just going to gain body fat. Whereas if you get more aggressive with fat loss, if you're lifting, eat enough protein, your inputs are dialed in, you'll lose body fat and you'll lose it quicker, right? And I just think that there are some downsides to pushing a deficit for long periods of time, which we'll talk about here. So again, if I'm gonna be more aggressive, it would definitely be on the fat loss side of things, because you can get in and out, and then you can go back to fueling enough and be closer to maintenance the rest of the time, right? Or again, if you're super lean, maybe you do get into a small surplus for a period of time and then go to maintenance from there. But again, so now we know we don't need aggressive weight gain to build muscle, but in some situations you may need to see your scale weight come up a little bit. And again, seeing your scale weight come up a tiny bit, I don't think is the worst thing in the world, right? Because again, now I think this whole recomp talk could, if you take this person that was 135, if you just say, yeah, you need to be 135 all the time, I think there's going to be some issues that come into that, right? You might see your scale weight come up a little bit for a period of time. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world, but what I'm saying is you don't need to push scale weight up. Hey, you need to go up 1 week or 1 pound a week, or on the flip side, you don't need to lose 1 pound a week to be successful. You can find that middle ground, but you're still going to have periods of time where I think you need to make sure that you're fueling enough, which is, if you listen to my episode from Monday on can you lose fat at maintenance, if you actually are losing fat, you are in a deficit in some form or fashion. Now, again, the slower the weight loss is, the slower the fat loss is, that does give you more runway to do that for a longer period of time there. But again, we know we don't need aggressive weight gain. We don't need aggressive weight loss in this process there. And then 3, simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain is real. A lot of people don't think it is, but it definitely is real, right? And a lot of people have more runway than they think to do both at the same time. The less muscle you have, the more body fat equals the more likely, in quotations, the easier it is to do. And when I say easier, it just means, hey, if we continue to dial in our inputs, that process is going to happen much better in this situation. But even even intermediate lifters and likely even some advanced lifters can still do both, especially if all inputs aren't dialed in, which most aren't, right? And so that comes back to what that post said, where if you improve these things, you can start to recomp. So again, I totally agree. And I think most people have more wiggle room to do that than they think, right? So again, you're talking your intermediates and even potentially your advanced lifters there. However, and this is important, you're likely not maximizing either one at the same time. Where you fall on the energy balance spectrum. So again, if you're pushing, and I'll go over some examples here, but if you're pushing faster weight loss, you'll lose more. As long as your inputs are dialed in, you'll lose more body fat, but your muscle growth potential will be impacted. You're not going to max build out muscle at that point, right? And then you get closer to maintenance. Now it's less fat loss. And if you get to maintenance, it's no fat loss. But again, remember, body weight being stable doesn't necessarily mean you're at maintenance calories, but your muscle growth potential gets higher, right? So again, where you fall on that is going to dictate the rate at which you lose, right? It's not like the switch of there's this perfect amount where you're everything's maxed out. They're going to be impacted in some form or fashion. It's just, hey, what do you want to prioritize in this situation? Your current body comp is super important as well too. The leaner you are, the more muscle you have, the less likely this is to happen. But there are some genetic freaks that can get away with that. But again, the less muscle you have and the more body fat you have, the more wiggle room we have here with this. And then your inputs are going to be key on which one is prioritized, right? Fat loss or muscle gain. Obviously, if you're not weight training, your body's not going to prioritize muscle growth in that situation. So we do need to make sure our inputs are there. We're looking at movement, sleep, nutrition, overall nutrition, weight training, and stress load management there. So some examples, right? Larger deficit plus solid training equals faster fat loss, less muscle gain, more about maintenance of muscle in this situation. And then you have a smaller deficit plus solid training is going to be slower fat loss, better chance of maintaining or gaining muscle. And this is going to be your best spot for simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain, right? If there is that sort of magic spot for people, it is going to be that smaller deficit plus solid training and your inputs dialed in. And that's going to be that slower fat loss, a better chance of maintaining and gaining muscle as well too, right? And then we have maintenance calories where you truly are at maintenance, not say your body weight staying the same, because you could be in a small deficit, building muscle, losing some body fat, and that's going to keep your body weight the same, but you are in a deficit there. How do you know the difference if you're at, say, actual maintenance calories, or in a small deficit, but your body weight staying the same? You would look at, is your waist shrinking, your biofeedback, are you a little bit hungry? That would tell me if somebody is in a small deficit versus actually at maintenance, right? Whereas I feel like, and you may see your body weight come down a little bit over time, right? It's if you were to look, it may stay around the same and it may be around the same, but it's like it is dipping down essentially over time. Whereas truly being at maintenance, it's your body weight's staying around the same, but you're kind of dipping, you're seeing it come up a little bit more from time to time, if that makes sense. But you're gonna because again, you're probably building some muscle here in this situation. You are. So muscle gain with minimal to no fat gain in this scenario, right? And then we have a small surplus plus strong training is more muscle gain potential, because look, you just have more fuel available. You're more regularly fueled. It's going to be better. You're going to put your body in a better position to want to add muscle, but it comes with some fat risk gain. So again, it just depends on where we fall on the muscle growth potential side of things there, right? Somebody that is on the leaner side, a lower body weight, and they have a decent amount of muscle and they want to continue to build more muscle. Maintenance, they can build some muscle, but it's going to be very slow, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you really want to maximize things for that person and really try to build muscle and feel like you're moving forward, I think a small surplus would be the most beneficial for that person. But it does come with some fat risk gain. And so that's where you have to be careful with that. And that's where I come back to, this took that person 6 years. Could they have done that a little bit quicker? Who knows, right? And does that matter? So my fourth point here on this, so we know that one, you don't need a big surplus to build muscle. You don't need aggressive weight loss to lose fat. But if I'm going to be more aggressive on one, it would definitely be fat loss, because you can lose fat a little bit quicker and then you can get back to eating at maintenance a lot sooner, right? And feeling enough and getting your body back to a position where it does want to add some muscle. And we know that simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain is real, but it depends on where we fall in terms of our calorie balance, and it depends on our inputs and our body composition as well too, right? So number 4 is simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain doesn't last forever. As you dial in your inputs and you get leaner, gain more muscle, simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain slows. And does it truly ever not happen, or does it get to the point where it's at zero? Maybe not, but the progress would just be so slow that you're just like, am I making progress? And the other thing that I get concerned about with this would be people can get stuck in artificially low maintenance calories if they stay here for too long, right? It would just be basically a less aggressive form of metabolic adaptation, where you're probably just eating in a lower energy state than what you could be if you didn't try to do both at the same time forever, right? So it's like you're from how much food you could take in, from maximum, basically you'd be at, like I said, artificially low maintenance calories. And so your maintenance calories would just be a little bit lower than they could be. And that could show up in, again, less flexibility, higher risk of not getting in all the vitamins that you need, maybe not necessarily the most optimal blood work from like a thyroid or a hormonal balance perspective. You just wouldn't be optimizing that there if you always try to do this. And to top it off, going to be in a spot where, fat loss definitely not maximized. So it's going to be slow from that perspective. And you're not putting yourself in the best position to build muscle. And again, I just come back to less flexibility from a nutrition perspective because your calories are lower, right? And in today's modern environment with high calorie dense foods, and how easily available those are, you do want to be careful with that, right? So this is my biggest thing with this is you could stay here forever, but eventually you're probably going to want to get to your actual maintenance calories, right? So that's kind of my whole point in this is that this isn't going to last forever there. And so that's my fifth point here is you still need phases over time, right? It's still probably better to have some periods of time in a deficit where you're going to push your calories down a little bit more, but we're still going to return to around maintenance. Like we're still making sure we're feeling enough. And then for some people, again, depending on your goals, what you want to do, occasional slight surpluses for some people are okay. And so this could be, and I guess another situation would be maybe someone is like low to moderate body fat and they just want to have a time where they want to eat a little bit more. They don't want to overly stress about things, like seeing your body weight come up and being in a small surplus for a short period of time. I don't think is the worst thing in the world, right? As long as you feel good, you have the flexibility you want, training is going well, you stay on top of your blood work and that's in a good spot. So I don't know if I said biofeedback, but biofeedback's in a good spot, right? You look at, when we go back to blood work, we talk about metabolic health, like we make sure that's in a good spot. That's not decreasing because when that starts to go down, then yeah, you probably don't want to keep doing that, even though I guess it's not that you can't do that. It's just, hey, you probably, from a long-term health perspective, you want to be careful, right? Everybody obviously has a choice if they're like, yeah, I don't really care if that happens. Okay, that's fine, but there are going to be some potential trade-offs. So for example, like I feel like I'm a good example of this right now. I did a fat loss phase probably till August, September-ish timeframe. It's May now, just for reference. And my goal was, hey, I'm going to try and test out one high 150s. I've never done this. I want to see what it is. And it worked for a couple months, but I ended up, it wasn't a good spot. I just felt, I would have to be a bit more restrictive than I would want from a food perspective. I probably would have somewhat of a artificially low maintenance calories at that 150-ish. Performance wasn't as good. I just found that I was hungrier, and then it gets harder to maintain. It's harder to moderate food intake. I've seen my weight come up and I'm not tracking. I could track and I could probably be more on top of my nutrition, but I see it come up a little bit more than I thought. But at the end of the day, I still feel fine from a body comp perspective. And my absolute leanest right now, no, I don't have my absolute best physique right now, but it's giving me the flexibility that I want. I'm still trying to focus on my inputs as best as I can in terms of sleep and in terms of training, pushing training, my meal timing, eating enough protein. And just where I'm at in my point in my life right now, I'm okay with that. It's not like my weight's going up 2 pounds every week. It's a slow kind of trend up. And so I'm okay with that, right? I will go back to a fat loss phase at some point because I think there's a lot of benefit to getting back into it. But do people need to do that to build muscle? I think again, depending on how lean you are, I think getting to a range where you feel good, and maybe that where you feel good, performance is good, you feel good from a biofeedback perspective. I think pushing weight up a little bit to that point to there, and then holding versus continuing to just push up all the time. Like, I think that's a better strategy, right? And this is going to look different for everybody depending on where they're at, right? If somebody is, for men, 15 to 20% body fat, I highly suggest not continuing to push body weight up. I think a better route for you would be to drop some body fat and then find that range there versus being at 15 to 20% and pushing scale weight up. And again, even if it gives you more flexibility, et cetera, I don't think that's the best case. But if somebody did do that at that 15, 20%, again, as long as our inputs are dialed in, it's probably not the worst thing in the world. But we would have to look at biofeedback and we'd have to look at blood work, right? In this situation. So you want more flexibility, but you're at 15 to 20%. Here's the downsides of having more flexibility, potentially being in a small surplus, right? So again, it just depends on where they're at. That person, if they were at 15 to 20%, I personally would want them to be at maintenance outside of their fat loss phases. I think it would be better for them to eventually get to the point where they get around 15%, maybe a little bit lower, and then go from there with that. And the biggest reason you still need phases over time is, one, because staying in a deficit too long is those metabolic adaptations that I talked about decreasing biofeedback, lower muscle growth, and maintenance potential the longer you do that, right? And this is especially true if somebody has a high training output. And so no matter what, even if it is a small deficit and you're losing, what's a small deficit, you're losing some body fat, maybe you're still building some muscle, eventually, no matter what, it's like you do that for too long and being in that deficit, there's going to be those adaptations that I talked about. And then you're going to lead to being in artificially low maintenance calories at that point. It's like you're probably just eating less than you potentially could if you increase your calories a little bit, right? And so I think this, while I'm thinking about this, I think this whole recomp, keeping your weight the exact same all the time, can potentially lead to people underfueling at some point, right? There in the long term. And then on the flip side, for at maintenance or in a surplus, obviously there's no fat loss. So it's, you want to get a bit leaner. It's like, you're not going to be able to do that by just eating at maintenance or being in a surplus. You have to get into a deficit at some point, right? So I come back to like, we still need some phases. Like over time, you're still going to slide across the energy balance spectrum where it's a little bit more focused on fat loss. And so the sliding the scale more towards an energy deficit, but we still need to slide that a little bit more focused on fueling performance in muscle. So sliding the scale closer to maintenance in a small surplus. But what that looks like exactly depends on your goal, your current body composition, and the trade-offs you're willing to make. And so I still think that we're going to need to manipulate our calories over time and push it one way or the other and see a little bit of change in our body weight. Now, when you zoom out and you look over 6 years, yeah, maybe your scale weight ends up being around the same and you have better body composition. But I think it would be misleading to think that you could stay the exact same weight for 6 years and have drastic change. I still think you need to slightly manipulate your weight, but we don't need to be overly aggressive with it. And we don't need to really push calories up because again, that can be an excuse to just eat anything and everything. I'm bulking. Yeah, but you're probably adding a lot of body fat. So yeah, you probably don't need to do that. And the downside with that is you're always going to have periods of time where you're going to have to be somewhat on top of things, right? You're never going to be able to just be like, you know what, screw it. Again, you could be, but you're probably going to gain a bunch of weight in that process there. So still a couple more things I want to go over. I will say what is a potential feasible strategy for people would be, because I use this with clients, right? Clients that maybe tend to struggle with having these phases where they do really push like weight loss rate. So it's expecting them to be in a deficit for multiple weeks on end. Maybe they have these phases where they are a bit more aggressive with it. Say, you know what, I'm on top of things. Now I'm going to be able to push fat loss. And then they have some periods of time where maybe and this is maybe 2 weeks of that. And then they go back to maintenance for a little bit. Maybe they're just like, they had events come up, they got a little burnt out. I think that's okay, right? So you're dipping into a deficit every so often and then coming out. Is that the best strategy? No, but this is one way that you could run it, right? While milking out some simultaneous fat loss and muscle gain, right? Because if you think about it, somebody dips into a deficit for a couple of weeks and then maybe they're like, oh, whatever happens, now they're a little bit closer to maintenance at that point. Now, as long as their inputs are in check, they're still gaining some muscle, but they're still potentially losing some body fat during those deficit weeks. Now, again, like I said, is that the best strategy? Probably not, but this is great for clients who maybe are a little bit more on and off, they're busy, and their weight loss is a bit slower, right? That's a great way to frame that. But your inputs matter, and so does your biofeedback. So no matter what, we have to pay attention to both of those. In this situation, if this person's not weight training, they're not hitting enough protein, then we need to focus on those things at the end of the day, right? Because then that's the problem though, not necessarily, hey, you're in a deficit for 2 weeks and you're maintenance. No, you need to focus on your inputs there. But your biofeedback matters too. If somebody were to do this and they felt over time that maybe their energy levels were lower, they didn't feel good, they felt super bloated, et cetera, we would need to reconsider this strategy. But if somebody feels great, training's going well, they're feeling better, energy's better, and we pair that with blood work and that looks good, they're fine, right? This is a feasible strategy for somebody to do over time. And in this situation, you would be able to be in a deficit more often, right? Because your biofeedback's in a good spot. And again, maybe weight loss is slower from there. So yeah, but again, ultimately it comes down to the person and their current body comp at the end of the day, right? So that's where I kind of get, when you hear these things of like recomping is the way to go and bulking and cutting instead, it's, yeah, I don't think I'm a huge recomp fan. And there, again, a lot of people have a lot more runway than they think to be able to do that. But to say that, hey, you shouldn't ever bulk or cut. Yeah, we shouldn't just gain a bunch of weight, lose a bunch of weight, do that over and over again, because I don't think that's going to be productive either, right there. But again, I come back to the most important factors, no matter what. I'm more concerned about your biofeedback and your inputs than exact like calorie numbers, right? Because again, if we're lifting, like most factors are lifting with a focus on adding muscle, because no matter where you're at on the energy balance side of things, you're going to at least maintain, and then you're probably going to be closer to maintenance most of the time, maybe a small surplus, but you're still going to add some muscle. Now, again, we talked about for people that are on the higher end of body fat ranges, so you probably want to be careful with the surplus on there. If we're eating enough protein, like that is really going to help. And the thing with protein, that what it does multiple things. It obviously puts you in a good position to build muscle, but once you get past a certain point around that 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, give or take a little bit. I don't want to get caught up in exact numbers there because I just think that is a losing battle. And we don't, so many different things, body fat percentage, genetics, et cetera, are going to impact that. But let's just say 0.8 maximizes muscle growth. So really what that means is, hey, if you just go to 2 grams per pound of body weight for protein, you're not going to build muscle faster. It all comes down to the other inputs, lifting, sleep, et cetera, that your caloric intake or where you're at on the energy balance side of things, right? But what protein does is it's going to make sure that it's going to complete the process from a muscle building standpoint if you eat enough, but you still need to have the right training strategies in place, et cetera. But protein's satiating, so now you're less likely to overconsume calories, and it increases your thermic effect of food, which not a huge amount, but that does impact things. So now you're expending a little bit more energy. So again, you're less likely to be in a surplus, right? So protein is going to be helpful from that standpoint. Protein is going to be great to help manage blood sugar, right? So again, if that can help manage your blood sugar, like you're going to be in a better state from a metabolic standpoint, which again is going to just put you in a better position to see body comp change, fat loss, muscle gain, whatever it may be. Other important input is just managing overall caloric intake, right? Not necessarily perfection of you need to eat 2,126 calories. No, it's direction though. We don't need to be perfect, but as long as we're just not drastically overeating all the time or drastically undereating, like that's the most important thing, right? That's a little bit tougher than people think it is to do. It can be done, but it is a little bit tougher to do it in the long term. In the short term, it can definitely be done, but I think in the long term, that's a little bit more challenging than people think. Plus up or down, right? Again, there's less the sort of subconscious things that will keep you from doing that. They're definitely going to be louder or less loud when you're gaining weight, right? Because the body's going to be like, okay, cool, this is extra energy. Let's just keep going. Whereas on the way down, losing weight, it's like you're going to feel a super aggressive diet to where you can only sustain that for short periods of time. But everyone's genetics are different. Some people's bodies are really good at being like, whoa, we don't need this extra energy. Let's be wasteful. Whereas other people's bodies are like, let's go. Let's freaking stack up this. Let's just get as much stored energy as we can, right? But that's going to be problematic long term in today's modern environment, right? So again, we don't need, if we're focusing on enough protein, you're going to put yourself in a better position to manage your overall caloric intake, right? And then if you also improve your diet quality, we're improving our meal timing. We're setting it up to where now you're more likely to have better appetite regulation. If you set that up, you're putting it some around your training to get the most out of training. You're recovering from training, so then you can go back and train hard again. And we're improving your choices too, right? So people overly focus on what do my calories need to be, but then it's like their choices are terrible. Their meal timing's terrible. It's like, it doesn't matter. You need to just make better choices. You need probably a little bit more fiber. You need a little bit more nutrient dense type foods there. But we don't have to be overly concerned with your exact calorie amount in that situation, right? We improve sleep, get into a better circadian rhythm routine. Again, your body's just going to be it's going to be tougher to overconsume calories when you're lifting, eating enough protein, and also you're dialing in your circadian rhythm, right? Your sleep and wake times, getting your light exposure right. We are spending some time to make sure we're fueling enough versus just slashing calories all the time. Again, you're going to have better appetite management in that situation. You're going to be able to push training more. You're going to be able to add muscle easier, right? And then if we can also have stress load management. So stress load management being, all right, what's the overall amount of stress that we're putting on our body? And it's not just, hey, I had a tough work week or I got into a fight with my significant other. That is a big piece of the stress load management, but your total stress load's also, hey, what are the stressors that we're putting on from like a body comp or training perspective? And most people don't think about those things, right? Deficit is a stressor on the body, and it can be a good stressor, but if that stressor is misapplied, it doesn't really matter, right? Or if that stressor is misapplied, then you may not get the outcome that you're expecting from that there, right? And circadian rhythm disruption is a stressor on the body. So it's, hey, you're also trying to do all these things, and then that doesn't, there's too much stress on the body to where it's going to be more in survival mode versus, hey, let's change our body composition there, right? So again, those are the most important factors. And I just think people end up getting too caught up in bulking, cutting, recomping, et cetera. But when you can really dial those in, and then again, over time, yes, we do probably want to slightly go tip the scales closer to deficit every once in a while, closer to maintenance. Then we can focus on those things. But I think if you get these in check first, that will naturally happen, and we need to focus less on this. Let's sum this up. Hopefully you understood that, hey, bulking and cutting isn't necessarily dead. It's just, I think, maybe the old kind of thought process on it of this aggressive fat loss and aggressive weight gain is out of the picture. And I think really, if you were to really sum this up, it's, hey, you really don't need to push weight gain to build a bunch of muscle, right? And I think that's definitely the case, right? And then you also don't you don't have to have aggressive weight loss either, right? People overly focus on continuing to see their scale weight go down. We also don't need to do that. Now, again, that all comes back to where you at. If you're 250 plus pounds, your BMI is 30 plus, you're going to need to get your weight down. You're not going to be able to recomp your way to good body composition. You're going to have to be, your scales are going to be tipped a bit more to the fat loss side of things. Whereas if your BMI is somewhere between 25, 26, 27, maybe slightly in the overweight category, it's like your energy balance scale is going to be closer to maintenance in that situation. And then obviously the lower you get on the BMI scale, BMI is not everything, but it can tell us a little bit, then you're obviously going to be at maintenance or surplus for that person. So again, I think bulking and cutting isn't necessarily dead, but how you think about it is dead in terms of these super aggressive weight gain, weight loss strategies. And we know we can simultaneously lose fat loss and muscle gain, but where we fall on that depends on our body composition, our inputs, where we're at on the energy balance spectrum side of things there. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this. I hope this was helpful and give you some insight into bulking and cutting. And I guess one last thing before I stop here with this. So again, with clients, like we still will have periods of time where maybe we're focused a bit more on the fat loss side of things. And then we have other times where we're more focused on the maintenance side of things or small surplus, depending on where they're at, right? And again, this comes back to building and fat loss phases. So that's why I say building recomp, fat loss recomp, because where we fall on that is going to be dependent on the person, right? If somebody is, they want to be more flexible with fat loss, then we're going to probably have a smaller deficit and they'll be in a fat loss phase for a bit longer, or they just may not lose as much body fat, which is fine. And then we go back to maintenance, right? So again, we're still going to slide on this energy balance spectrum over time. It just depends on the person, what they want to do, and again, their body comp, right? That's what I said earlier. It depends on your goal, your current body composition, and the trade you're willing to make in that situation. So hope this was helpful. If you guys found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that'll help more people find it. And then make sure you give me a follow and talk to you guys soon.